The stench reaches you before anything else. Not the scented oils they frantically poured across the stones. Not the burning incense suffocating the air from silver censers positioned in every corner. Not even the rancid perspiration of terror and velvet that permeates these ancient walls. No, it's decay, sweet, viscous, forcing its way into your nostrils like something sentient. The kind of odor that lines the back of your throat, that you can actually taste. Rotting meat liquefying beneath expensive silk and linen wrappings, seeping through layer upon layer of bandages. They replace them 3 times daily, but it's futile. Always futile. You observe a courtier lurch backward from the entrance, palm pressed desperately over his face. His complexion has turned the shade of spoiled flesh. Another nobleman, some baron whose identity you'll never recall, vomits into a corner, his morning meal spattering across tapestries valued more than whole settlements. Nobody moves to assist him. Nobody dares venture closer to that threshold. The younger ones, the fresh arrivals who've only witnessed Henry as this bloated mass wrapped in silk, they clutch handkerchiefs drenched in lavender essence against their noses. It accomplishes nothing. The veteran courtiers, those who remember him youthful and radiant and terrifying, in an entirely different manner, they've mastered breathing through their mouths, small sips of air, never full breaths. Never. You hear it then from beyond that entrance. A guttural moan that begins human and transforms into something else altogether. Agony given sound, the type of noise that makes your spine attempt to escape your body. The guards positioned at the doorway stand motionless, gazes locked on emptiness. You wonder how many hours they've maintained this post, how many hours they've endured those sounds, whether sleep will ever come easily again. A physician exits, moving with undue haste, and you glimpse inside as the door swings wide. Just a flash, but it suffices. Mountains of cushions and expensive fabric, something enormous propped among them, skin the shade of melted wax, and there on the bedside table, bowls of... You avert your eyes before your brain can register what fills those bowls, what they've been extracting from him. The door crashes shut. The physician rushes past without acknowledging anyone. His hands tremble as he grips a bundle of fouled bandages. You smell them as he passes. Death and infection and something sweeter, something more terrible. Behind you, someone murmurs, "How long? Days?" Another voice responds, "Perhaps hours. The fever..." Silence your mouth, a hissed order. You want to forfeit your head for prophecy? Because that's the statute, isn't it? Forecasting the monarch's death constitutes treason. Has been for ages, so everyone knows he's perishing. Everyone can smell him perishing, and not a single soul can articulate it aloud. You flatten yourself against the wall as additional physicians materialize. They advance with the grave resolve of men approaching their own executions. Because, what can they accomplish? What miracle can they conjure now? The flesh behind that door is a battleground they surrendered months ago, perhaps years. They're merely here to observe, to be present when it occurs so they can testify later that they attempted everything possible, that it wasn't their responsibility. Please God, don't let the blame fall on them. Another moan, extended this time, followed by words you can't distinguish, except you capture one, just one. Jane Seymour, deceased 11 years, the sole wife he appeared to genuinely grieve, the one interred at Windsor awaiting him because he'd commanded it years ago when he still believed death was something that befell other people. Footsteps reverberate down the passage. Heavy, purposeful, men in costly velvet moving with the sort of casual authority that announces they're about to inherit everything. The Seymour brothers, Edward and Thomas, here to attend their dying brother-in-law. Certainly, that's what they'd claim. But you perceive it in their expressions, the calculation, the schemes already formed, the takeover already in motion, because that's the other scent in this palace beneath the decay and the incense and the dread, opportunity. The sovereign is dying, the heir is 9 years old, and England, powerful, Protestant, prosperous England, is about to belong to whoever's quickest and cleverest and most merciless. When that door finally opens for the final time, a scream rips through the atmosphere. Raw, animal. The type of sound you didn't realize a human throat could produce. It continues and continues, ascending and descending until it's not even a scream anymore. Just noise, just the sound of flesh that's become nothing but suffering. Then silence, worse silence. The kind that makes you count heartbeats and question if this is it. If it's finally concluded, then breathing, ragged and liquid. But there, not yet. You contemplate who's behind that door. Really contemplate it. That's Henry VIII in there. Henry Tudor, the man who told the Pope to go to hell and made it permanent. Who wed 6 women and discarded them like changing garments. Who demolished monasteries, enriched aristocrats, slaughtered thousands. Reshaped English faith because he desired a divorce and wouldn't accept refusal. The man who was stunning once. Genuinely stunning. 6'2" and athletic and golden-haired and so magnetic that ambassadors wrote home in wonder. Who danced for hours. Who jousted and hunted and composed melodies. Who was destined to be England's magnificent Renaissance prince. That's who's decomposing alive behind that door. 38 years of absolute authority. Anything he desired, he seized. Anyone who resisted him, he eliminated. The entire nation bent to his command or shattered trying to oppose. And now he can't even manage his own bodily functions. Can't walk. Can scarcely speak. Can't halt the infection devouring him alive from within. This was once the most formidable man in Europe. Now he's flesh and discharge, and the reek of death wearing a crown. And you're about to witness him die. Before we cross through that door, if you're the type of person who doesn't flinch from history's bleakest realities, hit that like button immediately and subscribe to Curious Historians, because we're taking you places the textbooks refuse, places they can't. This is merely the beginning of Henry's final nightmare, and trust me, you don't want to miss what unfolds next. Now, let's enter. The door opens. You step inside and the heat assaults you. The fireplace blazing, logs splitting, the chamber at 90 degrees, but the thing in the bed is swathed in furs, shivering. You force yourself to observe him. The face is swollen beyond identification. His neck has vanished into creases of flesh. His eyes are buried so profoundly in bloated tissue they resemble raisins embedded in dough. This cannot be the same man, but it is. Travel back with me. April 1509. You're in the streets of London observing the new monarch's coronation. Henry VIII at 17 resembles God's masterpiece. 6'2" when most men barely reach 5.5. Shoulders like a fortress. A waist you could encircle with your hands. Hair that captures sunlight and transforms it to gold. He's wearing cloth. Of gold. Literally gold thread woven into silk. And he radiates like something from legend. The crowd roars until throats go hoarse. 3 years later, you observe him at a tournament. His armor is burnished steel engraved with Tudor roses, fitted flawlessly to his 32-inch waist, his 44-inch chest. He charges. His lance strikes his opponent square on the breastplate. The knight goes airborne, crashes, doesn't rise. Henry circles around, lifts his visor, grins. The crowd erupts. At the banquet afterward, he dances for 6 hours straight. Partners collapse from exhaustion. Henry continues. Then he picks up a lute and performs for another hour. Compositions he authored himself. The Venetian ambassador writes home he speaks French, English, Latin, and Italian, plays lute and harpsichord, sings from sight, draws the bow with greater strength than any man in England, and jousts marvellously. This is the man who informs the Pope that England will possess its own church now, who has Thomas More beheaded for disagreeing, who tears down monasteries stone by stone, who fabricates charges against Anne Boleyn and has her head severed, then marries Jane Seymour 11 days later. Absolute authority. For 3 decades, what Henry desires becomes statute. What he doesn't desire ceases to exist. His body appears indestructible. Until January 24, 1536. Greenwich Tiltyard. Henry's 44 now, competing in a tournament. He charges down the lists. Lance positioned. Something fails. The opposing lance catches wrong. Henry goes airborne, 400 pounds of man and armour striking frozen earth, with an impact you perceive from 50 feet away. Then his horse descends on top of him, a ton and a half of terrified animal. For 2 hours, they believe he's deceased. He awakens, but something's fractured. The headaches commence within weeks. Blinding agony that has him screaming in darkened rooms for days. His temperament becomes volcanic, erratic. He'll be laughing. Then suddenly someone's arrested, executed. The leg wound from the accident doesn't mend. A small ulcer that expands. Begins weeping continuously. They attempt everything. Poultices, cauterization with heated irons, Henry biting down on leather. Nothing succeeds. The wound tunnels deeper. You can glimpse bone sometimes, and the weight accumulation starts. Not normal middle-age weight. Something pathological. His 32-inch waist expands to 42, then 48, then 54. By 1545 his armour displays a 58-inch waist. Nearly 5 feet around. His face inflates. His chin disappears into folds. His legs develop additional ulcers. Both legs now open wounds that never seal. Walking becomes impossible. They construct chairs with pulleys and straps. 6 men to hoist him, transport him room to room because the King of England can no longer walk. Modern physicians have theories. Traumatic brain injury from the jousting accident damaging the portion of high-S brain controlling impulse and emotion. Cushing syndrome, a tumor flooding his body with cortisol. Type 2 diabetes, certainly. His physicians noted his urine tasted sweet, and sweet urine means wounds that refuse to heal. Whatever the cause, the effect is undeniable. By his 50s, Henry VIII is unrecognizable. 400 pounds of failing organs and infected tissue. But he's still sovereign, still signing execution orders, still convinced somehow he'll recover, still believing he's the man from the portraits. If you're still viewing this, you crave the truth, the blood and psychological terror of it. So why haven't you subscribed? 98% of you haven't clicked that button. If you won't, tell me in the comments what's preventing you. Because we're about to observe this man's final descent. December 1546. You're outside the sovereign's bedchamber at Whitehall, and you can hear him through the door. Not words, just groaning that rises and falls like waves. The physicians enter and exit, each time emerging quicker, carrying bundles you don't want to examine. One younger doctor attempts to explain what he's witnessing. The left leg, the ulcer has turned black. The tissue is. Lower your voice. But if we don't inform him what? That he's dying? You want to forfeit your head for prophecy? Because predicting the king's death is treason. They all know he's dying. Not one can articulate it. Inside, Henry's leg wounds have turned gangrene. Nous. The flesh around the ulcers has progressed from red to purple to black. Dead tissue that smells like a battlefield 3 days after combat. They're cutting away the decay when they can. When Henry's lucid enough to endure it. Slicing off pieces of the King of England like butchers trimming spoiled meat. He screams during these procedures. The sound travels through the palace. The fevers arrive more frequently, every few days, sometimes daily. His temperature spikes until he's delirious, thrashing, shouting at people who aren't there. Cromwell, where's that traitor? Cromwell's been deceased 6 years. Catherine of Aragon, come here. She's been deceased, even longer. The fever subsides and he's lucid for a few hours, signing documents with a hand that trembles so severely the signatures barely resemble letters. The isolation grows thicker than the stench. Who wants to visit? Who wants to observe the king drool and moan? Who wants to be alone with him when he dies? His fool stops appearing, claims illness. Everyone knows he's lying. Nobody blames him. Even Catherine Parr, his 6th wife, makes an error. Early December, they're discussing theology. She disagrees with him on some minor point. He hears heresy. Within hours, there's a warrant for her arrest. She discovers this, goes to his chamber that night, falls to her knees, weeps, says she only hoped to learn from his wisdom. Henry pats her head. Is it so, sweetheart? Then we are friends again. The Warra. NT vanishes. Even dying, he can still execute you. January 1st, 1547. The new year begins without the King of England, too weak to attend celebrations. First week of January, he doesn't depart his bedchamber. Can't. He remains in bed, in cushions and furs changed constantly because they saturate through. His appetite fails. A few bites of bread soaked in wine. Sometimes not even that. Second week, the fevers return worse, so high his skin's scorching through the blankets. During the peaks he's completely gone, eyes open but seeing nothing. He has conversations with the deceased, arguments with phantoms. When the fever breaks, maybe an hour of clarity. He uses it to work. The Duke of Norfolk is in the Tower, scheduled for execution January 28th. Norfolk's family pleads for mercy. Henry doesn't respond. The old man will die because Henry says so. Third week, he loses the capacity to speak clearly. His tongue's too swollen. Words emerge slurred, garbled. The physicians whisper in corners. How long? Days? Maybe a week. Outside the sick room, Edward Seymour is everywhere, taking meetings, building alliances. Because when Henry dies, 9-year-old Edward becomes sovereign, and whoever controls the boy controls England. It's a coup in slow motion transpiring, while Henry's still technically alive. The palace is a snake pit of whispered conversations and midnight meetings. And in the center, in that overheated room, Henry fades in and out. His breathing transforms, shallower, irregular, long pauses that make everyone freeze before it resumes again. The attendants work in shifts, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. Nobody can endure more. Outside, London continues. Markets open, children play. Inside the palace, everything's waiting. History's greatest tyrant is dying alone in his own filth. If this story grips you, why haven't you subscribed to Curious Historians? 98% of you haven't. Drop a comment if you won't. Tell me what content you need, because we're about to witness a king take his final breaths. January 21st. You observe Henry sign his last document. His hand shakes so violently it takes 3 attempts. The signature that once flowed bold and confident across treaties and death warrants now wavers like a child's first attempt at writing. Henry Arthur Rex. For king. Someone supports his arm. The quill scratches across parchment. The ink barely dries before an attendant whisks it away. That trembling signature is the last time Henry VIII writes his own name. January 23rd. He can't rise from bed anymore. Not even to his chair. The effort's too much. So the chair sits empty across the room, and sometimes when he's lucid, he stares at it. You wonder what he's thinking. If he remembers what it felt like to walk, to dance, to fight. Or if he's too busy drowning to remember anything. The death watch begins, though nobody calls it that. Men start appearing at odd hours. Nobles who've been careful. Absent suddenly have urgent business nearby. Not in the room. God, no, not that smell. But close. In antechambers, lingering in corridors, positioning themselves for what comes next. Inside. Maybe 6 people at any time. Physicians checking pulses with careful fingers. Attendants adjusting pillows. A secretary in the corner in case the king manages to speak orders. They rotate constantly. Nobody can endure a full shift anymore. January 25th. They bring in priests. It's expected, standard. The king should receive last rites, confess his sins, prepare his soul. Henry refuses. Maybe it's pride, maybe denial, maybe even now he thinks he'll recover, that the fever will break, that he'll rise from this bed and rule another decade. Or maybe he's terrified, because Henry broke from the Catholic Church, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, spent decades arguing about salvation and sin, and now at the end, what if he was wrong? What if Rome was right and he's about to face judgment for schism and heresy and the blood of 2 wives? So he waves the priests away with weak flapping hands and goes on dying. January 26th. He's unconscious more than awake now. His breathing's changed, shallow, irregular, punctuated by long pauses where everyone holds their breath thinking this is it, before he gasps back. The smell has reached a crescendo. Despite open windows, despite freezing air flooding in, despite burning herbs and perfume and desperate scurr. Ubbing, the room reeks of death. His skin's taken on a waxy yellow quality. His lips are cracked and bleeding. His eyes, when they open, don't see anything anymore. They open the windows wider. January cold pours in, but it's better than suffocating in the stench. The curtains billow. Frost forms on the inside of the glass. Henry shivers under his furs, but nobody closes the windows. Outside in the corridors, courtiers pray, not for his recovery, for his soul maybe, mostly for this to be over. Inside the antechambers, they plot, Seymour and his faction finalizing plans, other nobles trying to determine which side to support. Nobody sleeps in Whitehall Palace that night. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer receives a summons in Canterbury. The king wants him, needs him. Cranmer's been Henry's archbishop for 15 years, helped orchestrate the break from Rome, granted the divorce from Catherine of Aragon that started everything. He rides through January cold, his horse's breath fogging. He has no idea what he'll find. January 27th, evening. Cranmer reaches Whitehall after dark. They lead him through corridors that grow quieter as he approaches the royal chambers, past courtiers who won't meet his eyes, past guards standing rigid, to the door. The smell hits him before he crosses the threshold. Inside, the room's dim despite the roaring fire. Candles flicker in the draught. The massive bed dominates everything. Cranmer stops. That's not a king, that's barely a man. The face is bloated beyond recognition. The body, you can't tell where it ends and the bedclothes begin. The breathing sounds wet, labored like drowning on dry land. Cranmer approaches, kneels beside the bed. "Your Majesty," no response. Henry's eyes are closed, his face slack. Cranmer stays, praying, waiting. Outside, the vultures gather. Seymour and his allies. Other nobles calculating which faction to support. Secretaries preparing announcements they're not allowed to make yet. Nobody sleeps. The hours crawl. 10 p.m., January 27th. Henry's eyes open. For a heartbeat, there's something there, some flicker of awareness. He tries to speak. His lips move. Nothing comes out but a wet rasp. Cranmer leans closer. "Your Majesty?" The lips move again, trying to form words. What words? No one will ever know. Confession? Regret? Defiance? Or just confusion? A dying brain firing random signals. The eyes close again. Midnight. January 28, 1547. The new day arrives. Henry VIII is still, impossibly, alive. But something's changed. You feel it in the room. The quality of the silence. Everyone's movements have slowed, become careful, reverent almost. This is it. Everyone knows. Cranmer speaks softly. "Your Majesty, if you can hear me, are you at peace with God? Do you trust in Christ's mercy?" Henry's hand moves, slight, a twitch of fingers, but Cranmer feels it. Reaches out, and Henry's fingers close around his. Not strong, not the grip of the man who NCE crushed opponents in jousts. Just a weak flutter of pressure. But it's there. Cranmer takes it as a sign. He has given a sign, he whispers. He trusts in God's mercy. Maybe it's true. Maybe wishful thinking. Maybe just the dying body's animal response to touch. Those are the last seconds of communication from Henry VIII. His fingers relax. 1 mm. The death rattle starts. If you've never heard it, count yourself fortunate. It's the sound of fluid-filled lungs trying to pull air through liquid. A wet, rattling, horrible sound that goes on and on. Cranmer continues praying, his voice steady, mechanical. Because what else is there to do? The attendants stand frozen. This is history. This is the moment they'll tell their grandchildren about. The rattle fills the room, competes with the crackle of fire, the whisper of wind through open windows. 1:30 am. Someone starts crying quietly. You can't tell who. Maybe someone who remembers the young king, the beautiful prince who once danced all night. 2 am. The breathing changes one final time, slower, longer pauses between each rattling inhale. Cranmer's prayer becomes rhythm. Our Father, who art in heaven, pause. Hallowed be thy name. Pause. Thy kingdom come. The pauses grow longer. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Everyone stopped pretending to do anything else. They're watching the bed, watching for movement. 20 seconds. Still nothing. 25. Cranmer stops praying mid-sent. Ents. 30 seconds of silence. One physician steps forward, places careful fingers against Henry's neck, searching for a pulse. Waits. Checks again. Looks up at the others. Nods once. King Henry VIII is dead. No dramatic final words. No lightning or earthquake or cosmic significance. Just a body stopping. The absence of breath where breath used to be. Approximately 2 am. January 28, 1547. 55 years old. The room stays frozen for what feels like hours but is probably seconds. Then someone whispers, "The king is dead," and everything that comes after begins. But right now, in this moment, there's just a corpse, 400 pounds of meat cooling in silk sheets, and the overwhelming, inescapable smell of rot. You've witnessed a king die. You've spent these minutes with us in that death chamber, smelled what they smelled, saw what they saw. If you felt something, disgust, fascination, maybe even pity for the monster, hit that subscribe button to Curious Historians right now. And if you didn't, I need to know what would make you subscribe. Comment below, because we're not done. There's still the aftermath, the final horror of what happens when a tyrant's body betrays him even in death. The body lies in state for hours. No one touches it. Think about that. The King of England, dead in his bed, and no one moves him. No one closes his eyes or straightens his limbs or does any of the immediate death rituals you'd expect, because no one wants to be the first to touch a dead king. What if someone accuses you of murder later? What if his death becomes a political weapon and you were alone with the body? So they leave him, while Edward Seymour immediately, within minutes, takes control, sending messages, gathering allies, essentially staging a coup in the hours before anyone publicly knows the king is dead. The announcement doesn't come until 10 am, 8 hours after death. 8 hours of frantic political maneuvering while Henry's corpse cools in those silk sheets. By the time they announce it, Seymour's already won. He's secured the boy King Edward, locked down the council, positioned his men in every key role. The transition's over before most people even know there was a transition. But now they have a problem. The body, 400 pounds, is difficult enough to move. But 400 pounds of decomposing flesh, bloated with fluid, riddled with infection that's been festering for years. The embalmers arrive and stare at what they're supposed to prepare for burial. Where do you even start? They work for hours, draining fluids, packing cavities with spices and herbs, anything to slow the rot, to mask the smell that's only getting worse now that he's dead. The coffin they prepare is massive, lead-lined. Has to be. They coat the interior with more spices, more herbs, layers of wax-soaked cloth. Because dead doesn't mean the rot stops. If anything, it accelerates. The journey to why. Endless or takes days. Slow procession. Careful. The coffin transported with extreme caution because everyone's terrified of what might happen if it breaks open. They stop overnight at Syon Abbey. And here's where history gets strange. There's a story, maybe legend, maybe truth, that the coffin leaked, or burst. That by morning fluids had seeped onto the floor, that dogs were found licking at the remains. Historians still fight about whether it's true. Might be propaganda from Henry's enemies. Divine judgment on a tyrant. God's final word on a man who broke his church. But the fact that people believed it, the fact that the story spread and stuck, That tells you everything about how Henry was viewed at the end, not as a glorious king, as a monster whose body was so corrupted even death couldn't contain it. He's buried at Windsor Castle, St. George's Chapel, in the vault with Jane Seymour, the third wife, the one who gave him Edward, the one who died doing it. No grand tomb ever gets built. Henry planned one, commissioned it, was going to be the most spectacular monument in England, never happened. His daughter Elizabeth, when she finally takes the throne, doesn't finish it. So Henry VIII, the king who wanted monuments, who wanted eternal glory, who rewrote England's religion to serve his ego, gets a simple floor slab, marble inscription, nothing spectacular. You can visit it today. Tourists walk over it without noticing. Let's count the cost. 2 wives behead. D. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Both on adultery charges that were likely fabricated. Both killed because Henry wanted them gone. 2 wives divorced, Catherine of Aragon and Anne of Cleves. Catherine died broken and exiled. Anne survived by being smart enough to give Henry what he wanted. 1 wife died in childbirth, Jane Seymour, giving him his precious son. 1 wife survived, Catherine Parr, who outlived him by 18 months. But the wives are just the famous names. 70,000 executions, maybe more. It's hard to count because record-keeping wasn't perfect and mass executions during rebellions numbered in the thousands. Thomas Cromwell, his most capable minister, the man who made the break from Rome work, beheaded. Thomas More, scholar and saint, Henry's friend, beheaded for refusing to accept Henry as head of the church. John Fisher, cardinal and bishop, beheaded. The list goes on and on. Nobles, commoners, priests, scholars, anyone who crossed him, anyone who became inconvenient. And what did it buy? He changed England forever. The Church of England still exists. The break from Rome fundamentally altered English identity, politics, religion. That's real, that's permanent. But his children, Edward VI, the precious heir, died at 15, sickly his whole life, tuberculosis probably. Never the strong King Henry dreamed of. Mary I, from the Spanish marriage, became queen and tried to turn England Catholic again. Earned the nickname Bloody Mary for Burr. Ning Protestants, died childless and hated after 5 years. Elizabeth I, from Anne Boleyn, the daughter he barely acknowledged, finally stabilized things. Became one of England's greatest monarchs, reigned 45 years and died beloved. The irony? The daughter from the marriage that started everything, the marriage that broke England from Rome, she was the successful one. What killed him? Modern doctors still debate it. The jousting accident in 1536 probably caused traumatic brain injury, damage to the frontal lobe, explaining the personality change, the sudden rages, the lack of impulse control. Cushing's syndrome fits. A pituitary tumor flooding his body with cortisol explains the rapid weight gain, the moon face, the wounds that wouldn't heal, the mood swings. Type 2 diabetes almost certainly. His physicians noted the sweet-tasting urine. That means blood sugar through the roof, infections that never resolve, tissue breaking down. The leg ulcers suggest chronic venous insufficiency, poor circulation, blood pooling in his legs, causing tissue death. Some historians argue for syphilis, though the evidence is debatable. Probably it was all of it. Multiple conditions compounding, each making the others worse. His body a cascade of failures, each one triggering the next until the whole system collapsed. But here's what's certain. He died alone, feared, not loved, powerful until the end. But power didn't save him, didn't make the pain less, didn't make people want to be near him, didn't give him peace or comfort or anything resembling dignity. Absolute power for 38 years. And it bought him a death in his own filth, surrounded by people waiting for him to stop breathing so they could start fighting over the scraps. That's the price of tyranny. And we're still obsessed with him. 478 years later, still writing books, making documentaries, analyzing what went wrong. Because Henry VIII is a warning written in flesh and blood and rot about what happens when one person has too much power for too long, about what happens when nobody can say no, about what happens when you can kill anyone who disagrees, and eventually you're surrounded by people who tell you only what you want to hear, about what happens when your body becomes as corrupt as your power. He wanted to be remembered forever, wanted monuments and glory and his name in every history book. He got his wish, just not the way he imagined. We remember him, but not as the Golden Prince or the Renaissance King. We remember the monster, the tyrant, the man who rotted alive. We remember the smell. We've just spent 16 minutes in the company of a monster and a man, watching him fall from Golden Prince to rotting corpse. Curious Historians brings you these blood-soaked truths every week. The real history, not the sanitized textbook version, the parts that smell and hurt and make you uncomfortable. We're building a community of real history lovers who want the truth, no matter how dark. Join us by hitting that subscribe button, or tell me in the comments why you won't. What's holding you back? Because next week we're going somewhere even darker. Absolute corruption, absolute loneliness. That's the equation Henry VIII proved in flesh and bone and rotting tissue. He had everything a human being could want: wealth beyond measure, authority that was literally divine according to the laws he wrote, the ability to reshape a country, a religion, the course of history itself. And it bought him nothing where it mattered. It didn't make the pain less, didn't make people love him, didn't give him a peaceful death or even a dignified one. He died badly, as badly as any peasant in a ditch. Worse, maybe, because he had 38 years to see it coming and couldn't stop it. That's Henry's final lesson, the one they don't teach in school. Even kings die badly, especially kings, maybe. Because when you've had that much power for that long, when you've removed everyone who could tell you uncomfortable truths, when you're surrounded only by people terrified of you or using you, there's nobody left when you actually need them. Nobody to hold your hand because they care, just people holding your hand because they're required to, counting the minutes until you stop breathing. There's humanity in this horror, though. That's what makes it so compelling 4 centuries late. Henry wasn't born a monster. You saw what he was. Beautiful, talented, charismatic, the kind of prince people write songs about. Something broke him. Maybe the jousting accident, maybe the accumulation of power with no checks, maybe just the slow corruption that comes from getting everything you want for decades until you forget other people are real. But underneath the tyrant, underneath the rot, there was still a man, calling for his dead wife in fever dreams, scared enough of judgment to refuse last rites, human enough to feel pain, even if he'd stopped feeling empathy. That's what makes it tragic instead of just grotesque.